Now, before we went to break, Dr. Baran, you were talking about those microaggressions. And one of the things that you said, and it's very common, when a white person says to a black person, and you gave the example of a black man, and the white person says he's very articulate. Why then is that considered to be a microaggression?
Yeah. Well, first, just I'll flag that what Tiffany and I are recommending is that we refer to these as subtle acts of exclusion
Okay.
because we don't net, right? If we say it's a microaggression, that's focusing people's attention on the intention as aggressive.
Okay.
And we know, like
Good.
you were saying earlier, it might not be that person's intention to be aggressive. They might be just trying to compliment, right? And so, and yet, right?
Okay, well, let me
And
stop
yet,
you there. Okay, so
mhm,
micro being small, aggression being big. Okay, so we take
mhm,
that out of the way. Subtle acts
mhm.
of exclusion. Why would that be a subtle act of exclusion?
Yes, right. So first, because the person might be trying to compliment. So on the surface, they're saying you're so articulate, or some other ones we've heard, you're so well spoken, you're so professional, right? On the surface, it looks like a compliment and maybe feels like you're giving a compliment. Underneath the surface, though, what's being implicitly communicated? You're actually inadequate, or people like you are inadequate because I didn't expect you to be articulate. I didn't expect you to be professional. I didn't expect you to be well spoken. So I'm surprised, pleasantly surprised, right?
Hmm.
And so we have to look at what we look at in these subtle acts of exclusion are one thing is on the surface, but what's being implicitly communicated? Is it you're not normal, you're inadequate, you don't belong, you're invisible, you're a threat, you're a burden, you're a curiosity. All of these things are getting communicated to people under the surface. Like when
So is
someone asks,
that though, Dr. Barron, is that a
mhm,
lot to ask a person who really in their own mind, the white person that may have said this about a black
mhm.
person, is that asking that white person to go way, way deep within themselves? Just and they're saying, well, I don't get it. I was just complimenting that person. Do people
Right.
have the bandwidth to go that deep to say, because that person was black, or I made it I had an impression about who I thought they were, and when they
Mhm,
were really articulate and very well put together, that impressed me. I mean,
mhm.
is that asking too much?
No, it's not asking too much for so many reasons. I mean, first, I think white people need to go that deep and
Okay.
examine their own biases that sometimes might be unconscious. That's really important. And also, what we're not saying, we are not suggesting that everyone needs to know beforehand what all these subtle acts of exclusion might be for everyone else in the world. We're not saying that. You can't know,
Right.
right? You don't maybe have the experience or the familiarity with everyone who's different from you. And so you just might not know. What we're asking people to do, though, is, and we give guidelines for how to do this.
Right.
If someone says, "Oh, you were so articulate," and someone else says, "You know what? When people say that, it makes me feel like you're surprised or something. It doesn't make me feel great." What we are asking that white person to then do is, instead of getting defensive and saying, but I was just trying to compliment, but
Sure.
instead of that, them just saying, oh, okay, that makes you feel bad. I won't say that. Right. And so we're asking white people to be able to take that feedback and to use it to do some self exploration, to do some behavior change in the way they talk to people. If you get that feedback, to really think about it and just do things differently without making a huge deal about it.
Sure. Now, on the other side of that coin, for Black people, and just for this example, we're using Black people, for the Black people who are very articulate and they get that response from white people, that subtle act of exclusion. What about on the other side of the coin when that same Black person is articulate and another Black person says to them, "You sound white."
Yeah, so these subtle acts of exclusion play out in so many different ways, right? And and it's so complicated. There's no simple way of saying like, well, this is a subtle act of exclusion and this is not. And it's so complex because, for example, what might feel like a subtle act of exclusion one day doesn't feel like it the next. Partly depends on what's going on with me that day, right? Or what might feel like a subtle act of exclusion from one person doesn't feel like a subtle act of exclusion when a different person says it to me because of the relationship that we have.
Hmm.
Or what feels like a subtle act of exclusion to one person who is Black or who's gay or who's, blind, might not feel like a subtle act of exclusion to a different person who's blind or gay, right?
Right.
So it's all very complex. And the goal is, like I was saying, not that we know everything that's going to feel bad to everyone, not that we walk on eggshells, but rather that we build up cultures in our places of work, our places of learning, the places where we live, where we can just have more open, transparent, honest conversations about these things and just listen to the impact that our words and actions have on other people, take that seriously, and just do things differently.